Hello everyone, my name is John Manion and I'm the Kaul Wildflower Garden Curator here at Birmingham Botanical Gardens. I'm part of the Friends of Birmingham Botanical Gardens. And we're standing here in the Hugh and Bobby Kaul Wildflower Collection, and it's a 7-acre property here within Birmingham Botanical Gardens that now has the largest documented collection of native plants in the state of Alabama. I'm going to talk to you today about a very special plant, one that I believe to be one of the most charismatic in our native flora. It's a lily, and it's called spider lily, hammock lily, swamp lily. It has several different names, thus the importance of using botanical names so everyone would be on the same page and knowing exactly what plant we're speaking of. And the reason I say that is there are somewhere around 65 species of this hymenocallis. So hymenocallis is in the Amaryllidaceae, meaning it's in the amaryllis family, a plant that many people grow as houseplants because they're so showy. So they're bulbous, these plants are fragrant, they're showy, and they're herbaceous, meaning they're not woody, and most of them die back to the ground in the winter. The name hymenocallis is Greek, hymen meaning a membrane, callus meaning beautiful. And when we show you a close-up, I'll show you why it's called that. It's a ring of 6 petals that are curved and connected to a cup that leads down to the center of the plant. The specific plant I'm going to speak about today is Hymenocallus Occidentalis, which is one of the most common species and one of the easiest to grow. This is a plant that people call us about frequently or email us and tell us we've got Cahaba lilies in our yard, all excited. And my first reaction is, after asking them, is it growing in the water? And when they say no, I tell them, I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's not Cahaba lily. Cahaba lilies, as we'll learn a little bit later, is very special, endangered, has very exacting requirements to grow it. So when people find them in the woods, when they find them in their yard, when they find them in ditches, it's not Cahaba lily. This one looks just like the Cahaba lily and is so much easier to grow. You can grow it in a variety of conditions. It'll grow in wet areas, it can grow in dry areas once it's established. It doesn't like full shade. It'll grow in full shade, but it won't flower as well. I sometimes find colonies in the middle of the woods and they're robust foliage, but no flowers. So they need a little bit of light. And here in the Kaul Wildflower Garden, we have several growing. At the end of each season, I collect the seeds and grow them. They're very, very easy to grow. Here is an example. The plant that we're speaking of, by the way, is right here behind me on my left. And here is what it looks like when, well, let's start with this. These are there's a residual seed that I collected and planted last fall. It would have been bigger and green. Reminds me somewhat of a green robin's egg. I plant those in the fall. The first thing they do over the winter is they start putting down a root, and then in spring they start putting up their upper growth, the above ground portion of the growth. And here's 2. They've lost the seed capsule and have started growing. And here is the upper growth, the foliage. It takes them a few years to get to flowering size, but during that time they're still attractive for their wide, strappy foliage. Now that you've learned about these various lilies in the genus Hymenocallus, we have a special guest with us today to speak about an even more special species within the genus Hymenocallus. David Butler, a friend and a colleague, is the Cahaba Riverkeeper. He's also the attorney for the organization. And as many of you may know, it's an organization that works tirelessly to protect, to keep an eye on the Cahaba River. They do testing on a regular basis so that it'll be safe for everyone. So David, good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. So Coronaria is certainly a special species to me. I never was really interested all that much in plants, and seeing the Cahaba Lily bloom in stream was really a remarkable experience the first time for me.
How long ago was that?
Probably about 15 years ago when I first came back to Alabama.
Yeah.
I'd heard about it, but had never taken the time to drive down to the largest population in Alabama, which is at the Cahaba River National Wildlife Refuge, and was really just kind of blown away by how beautiful it was.
That area is protected, is that correct?
That's correct. It's a federal National Wildlife Refuge, so the plants within the refuge are protected. There's only 2 protected populations in Alabama, which is one there at the refuge, and then on Buck Creek, the city of Helena has adopted a city ordinance to protect the flower there.
Wonderful. And where else does it grow besides the Cahaba?
So it grows in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. Small pockets everywhere. There's a few large shoals, South Carolina and Georgia. And then within the Cahaba watershed, it grows on Shades Creek, on the Little Cahaba River in Bibb County, and Buck Creek, in addition to the main stem of the river.
I see. And what makes it different different than all our other hymenocallis species, like the one that I've already spoken about, the Hymenocallus Occidentalis? How does Hymenocallus Coronaria differ?
Well, I think the biggest difference is just the specific habitat that it requires to grow. And so one of the things that happens most often is we get calls from people who believe that they're growing in their flower bed out in front of their house, and they say, hey, we have the Cahaba Lily growing right in front of my house. And they send us pictures, and we can see that they're growing in dirt.
Yes.
And the Cahaba Lily only grows in water, usually swiftly flowing water. Usually you find it lodged in cracks and rocks. It requires pretty good water quality, so in streams where heavily impacted by siltation, you don't see it grow as well. And so the habitat there at the refuge is really perfect for it. You can see in the large shoals that it grows in that it really does quite well.
And why is it that people should not collect the seeds of the Cahaba lily or the Shoals lily, the seeds, or even collect the plants? I mean, in some areas they're in danger, but what other reason? Why should they avoid grabbing those?
Well, I think the biggest reason is that most people don't have the habitat that it requires to grow. And so there at the refuge, we see lots of people that come to enjoy the beauty of the flower and want to take some home with them. And
yes.
Certainly every time somebody does that, and if everybody did that, there'd be less flowers there for everybody to enjoy.
Yeah.
And typically what we see is that when they collect either the plant or the seed, they don't get them to a suitable habitat fast enough that the plant survives.
So they're destined to die.
They're destined to die. I mean, I often see people walking out with a wilted bunch of flowers, and so we really want to take the opportunity to give people an alternative to grow something like Occidentalis that's easier for everybody to grow. It's much more likely to survive in the typical habitat that people have at their home. And in doing so, they can enjoy a very similar flower without impacting the ability of the Cahaba lily to continue to grow.
Would I be correct in guessing that if you had Hymenocallus coronaria, the Cahaba lily, Shoals lily, and you had Hymenocallus occidentalis, the spider lily that we have here, do you think most people could tell them apart?
I don't think so. I think, typically, when people call and say they have the Cahaba lily growing in their yard, they refuse to accept that it's not because they are so similar.
Yes, and as I stated earlier, a good reason to grow this Hymenocallus occidentalis that we have here in the Kaul Wildflower Garden is that it essentially looks identical to the Cahaba lily, but these are easy to grow. Anyone can grow them in just about any condition, as opposed to the Cahaba lilies that are rare, endangered, protected in some areas, and are not easy to grow at all. They have very exacting conditions.
And I think, I'm a prime example. At our office, we have Occidentalis growing out in front of our office, and if I had not learned from somebody that it wasn't the Cahaba lily and I didn't know about its habitat, I would have believed the same thing.
Sure,
Certainly by becoming educated from people more knowledgeable than me, I've come to appreciate the difference between the two.
Thanks for stopping by, David.
Absolutely.
And I admire the work that you and the organization does in protecting the Cahaba River, and also monitoring it and seeing that everything is okay.
It's our pleasure.